Welcome to June's People and Culture meeting. The first item on the, are you starting recording, Mark? Let's do that one good first of all. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of chair for the municipal year.
So yes, can I have I believe that Councillor David Wilcox is willing to stand again
I
as
am,
chair.
yes.
So can I have a proposer, please, Don, and a seconder? Thank you, that's brilliant. Adam. And can we have any objections, please? Any abstentions? A show of hands for all votes for. Thank you, congratulations. You're appointed again as chair.
And the next item is apologies for absence, and we only have apologies from Councillor Andrew Brown, who's standing down from the Fire Authority. Now we'll move on to the emergency evacuation procedures.
Good morning, members, colleagues. There are no fire alarms planned for today, so if the fire alarm does sound or if we need to evacuate for any reason, there are a number of exits from the building. The easiest one for ourselves is via the external staircase at the rear of the room. So if, in the instance that we do have to evacuate, myself and Dave will escort you to the muster point and ensure we're all in a safe place.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to declarations of interest. Has anybody got any interests that they would like to declare?
And none received by the clerk also.
Excellent, thank you very much. And if we move on to public access, I understand we've not received any public access requirements.
We haven't. No.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to Chair's business. And I'd like to confirm that this People and Culture meeting is taking place as a face-to-face meeting. Due to the continuing prevalence of COVID-19, we are continuing to be sensible and limiting the number of attendees at meetings. For this reason, we are recording this meeting for public to view, whereas before COVID, committee meetings were not recorded. I would like to ask members to introduce themselves to the benefits of the watching public. So if we go round anti-clock.
Good morning all, I'm Richard Tucker, North Somerset Council, and represent Weston-super-Mare Milton Ward.
Ruth Jacobs, North Somerset Council, Wixon Lawrence and St George's.
Don Davis, Vice Chair of the Fire Authority and North Somerset Councillor for Pill.
Brenda Massey, Chair of the Fire Authority and Councillor for Southmead in Bristol.
Adam Monk, represent Filton Ward in South Gloss.
Brian Hopkinson, I represent Charlton Hayes and Krebs in South Gloucestershire.
Shelley Bromley, represent Western and Bath and North East Somerset Council.
And I'm the Chair, David Wilcox, Councillor for Lockleys Ward in Bristol. And now if we anti-clockwise for the officers, please.
Deputy Assistant Chief Fire Officer Vaughan Jenkins, Service Delivery Support, Lead Director for People and Culture Committee.
Good morning everyone, my name's Karen Shield, I'm the Head of HR for Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Good morning everybody, I'm Richard Stokes, Culture and Inclusion Manager.
Morning members, good morning everybody, Simon Shilton, Chief Forester, Chief Executive.
Good morning, Amanda Brown, the Clerk for Avon Fire Authority.
And now we have the clerk to advise about Avon pensions.
Yes, I think the representatives from Avon Pension Fund are not yet in the room, but they will be attending later to assist members with the exempt item when we go into exempt session.
And I'd like to advise that any voting required will take place as follows. I'll ask members for any votes against, any abstentions, and then a show of hands for members voting for. So the next item is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the People and Culture meeting held on the 4th of March. Does anybody have any issues that I'd like to raise around those minutes, please? Anybody like to propose those minutes? I'd like to move those minutes then. And Adam would like to propose them. Anybody for a second, please? And Barbara to second.
Brenda.
Sorry. I've done it again. Sorry. Minute that, please. Yeah. And now we move on
Is
to...
everybody in favour of the minutes?
Yes.
Check. Yeah, thank you.
And now we'll move on to the first item of the agenda, which is the DICE Strategy Progress Report. And I believe Richard's going to be speaking against that.
Thank you and good morning. This DICE strategy update provides a summary of the strategy for 2019 to 2022. Since the launch of the strategy, my team in DICE has been impacted with annual turnover in a relatively small team. This has presented challenges to deliver against the objective and actions. But at the moment, I'm actually restructuring the team and recruiting to fill vacant positions at present. The DICE strategy is actually under review at the moment and will be fully impact assessed and republished by September this year. The 2022 to 2025 DICE strategy will be more aligned to the fire service, fire standards and core code of ethics, our service plan, DICE objectives, internal audit and recommendations from the 2021 to 22 culture survey reports. As a unit, DICE continues to collaboratively work across the service to ensure DICE principles are embedded into every department. We work closely with HR, transformation, risk reduction, corporate comms and operational teams on stations and in control, delivering training, planning community engagement events such as Pride, St Paul's, Carnival and recruitment and discovery events. Some of the key areas of success from the DICE strategy are the creation of our community and partnership database, which is over 40 key community organisations, external partners, and can be accessed by any staff member. This provides greater reach into the community and improves the service's access to seldom heard communities and networks with key stakeholders across our regions. We've recently renewed our service level agreement with SARI for a further 3 years with key areas of work that include community engagement, focus particularly on prevention, protection and responding to the needs of our diverse communities. We also work with SARI in terms of training, working in partnership to deliver tailored training for SLT, HR, corporate comms and ops staff on the stations. Other work where we've gained success is in policy. This year DICE has worked proactively with the transformation team to ensure all of our policies are inclusive and free from barriers from equality. We've also worked together to develop a new digital system for carrying out impact assessments, which has received positive feedback so far from users. The system is still under development at the moment, but when it goes live later on this year, it will combine environmental, data protection, health, safety and wellbeing and safeguarding impact assessments in one place to enable better scrutiny of our policies and a broader range of key areas. Other areas of training, I've recently reviewed our e-learning, our quality and diversity e-learning program, which is now better aligned to the service plan actions, service values and behaviour framework, culture change and also the fire standards. A full quality impact assessment will be conducted before the module is relaunched for all staff to complete, and participation will be monitored by our learning development department and alerts will be sent to all heads of department to chase up staff who have not completed it. The next phase of the DICE training for managers will focus primarily on watch managers and will consist of models of non-violence communication and behavioural aspects of supervisory management from an equality and diversity perspective to support managers with de-escalating situations before they can manifest. And finally, in terms of data, DICE and corporate assurance have been working closely on measuring and monitoring the effectiveness of the actions from the culture change programme to ensure all culture change initiatives are progressing and improving the culture of the service and making working environments a better place to work in. Any questions at all?
Members have any questions about this report? Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I mean, appreciate the amount of work you've done over the last many years, and it's been a pretty difficult task which you've stuck to with great resolution, so thank you. I guess I'd just like to understand about the reorganisation of the team. I mean, I appreciate it's extremely hard to recruit anywhere at the moment, regardless of where we are, but just be useful for us to understand what you're going to reorganise.
Because we've obviously recently had the reports back from the culture survey, it's highlighted emerging themes that need to be addressed by DICE and included into the DICE strategy. Therefore, in terms of recruiting, my last DICE officer left in January, and I made the decision not to go out straight away to recruit because I wanted to reflect on that, on their JD, on their job description, and ensure that the actions or the key accountabilities actually fitted with the culture change and the culture journey, and also the progression we've been making with the HMIC FRS action plans. So that's why I've certainly restructured in terms of the JDs. Also, I've created a new post to be community facing, so a community engagement officer who will be based out into the community, working with stations and working with our key partners, external partners as well, as I feel that over the last couple of years we could have done a lot better with engaging with our communities. Another point to raise really is the fact that we've just had a census last year which will highlight changes in demographics and migration to different areas of Bristol, creating new communities or different communities, and obviously highlighting different areas where there may be risk and vulnerable communities as well.
Adam and Richard.
So I appreciate the cultural journey will never finish and is still ongoing, so that's encouraging in a sense of it's moving in the right direction. But in terms of the demographic change of the residents of particularly Bristol but wider afield, the new post you're creating, will a part of our deliverables be to see a more diverse intake of recruits, or is it just, not just, but is it community engagement, or are you looking for a measure of success?
I'm looking at a measure of success across a number of areas. So in terms of engagement, I think it's easy to say the word, but actually what does it mean? I'm looking for meaningful engagement. So yes, from a recruitment and employer of choice aspect, yes, we'll be looking at other areas where we can actually go in and talk to, as I say, seldomly heard community groups. An example of that is the Empire Boxing Club, where we've some of our community engagement officers have actually made real good contact with some disaffected young people, and there's been a genuine interest shown in the fire service and what we have to offer. So inroads like that are really key and important. We've also worked collaboratively with Bristol City Council and Department of Work and Pensions in recruitment events, and we've attended about 6 this year. So we just want to expand on that type of engagement. But I think also what's important is that everything has been pretty much Bristol focused, Bristol centric, and what we need to do is get out into those other areas, Baines, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. So that's where that community engagement officer will be working with stations that are around those areas and encouraging ops staff to actually go out and do more community engagement activities.
Thank you.
Richard, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Rich, for this report. I was interested in 5.1 particularly, and the home safety visits to the vulnerable communities. I think that's obviously a good link, and I didn't know if there was anything, a bit of detail you could sort of enlighten us what you found, and particularly what goes down well, and a bit more about that, I suppose.
That's something that I don't like personally, or our team doesn't personally get involved. But what we do is we work with the risk reduction, with the CYP team, business fire safety, and vulnerable adults team as well. The main work that we've done, or the main support we've given, is that community partnership database that we've created, which, as I said, gives them access to a wider range of our communities. Also, we've given advice in terms of individual community areas where there may be particular issues that have got an E&D focus on it as well. That is an area that I do want to actually improve on, work closer with risk reduction to see how we can actually be more supportive.
That's great, thank you. Thanks, Rich, well done for that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
And Vaughan, you wanted to come in?
It's just to add to the question Councillor Monk raised around attracting from diverse communities. What we've done as a service, utilising the underspend from the DICE budget, we've created 2 roles for community engagement officers specifically for recruitment, and they run recruitment events at various areas throughout the service area, stations, external venues, and going into the various groups like Babasa to attract diverse applicants as possible to the service. It was originally set up for the recruitment process, and then it was thought it would finish when the recruitment process had been completed and then be reinvigorated. But what we found from feedback from applicants and people we managed to attract to apply from diverse communities, they found it so beneficial that as a service we've extended that, utilising the underspend, so it's been a cost neutral event, that those roles have been extended to continue that work through the summer to attract people ready for the next recruitment process, as opposed to losing those links and then restarting again. And what we've also done as a service to support Richard and the DICE team, obviously Councillor Davis's point about how difficult it is to recruit, with a role within service, an FBU facilities role, where the FBU rep carries out 50% FBU facilities time and 50% service time. And we've also now moved that person from the role they were completing for the service in their 50% service time into the DICE team, because obviously the link between the FBU and the work the FBU does with Unity and Fairness for All links directly to the DICE strategy and the DICE team and the outcomes of the cultural survey. And that also gives us a direct in to the service with someone that they will know, they will have worked with, someone who's come into them talking about the diverse issues we need to address and the cultural issues. So appreciate how difficult it is for Richard to recruit in the current climate, but there are things that we've put in place as a service to support Richard and move the cultural journey forward.
Great,
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much, Richard. That was an excellent report. Thank you.
So the recommendation was just to note the report and the DICE strategy. So I don't think you're approving anything as such, you're just noting it.
So, just noting that report. And the next item on the agenda is the employment case update for 2020-21-22, which is Karen, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. You will be aware, potentially, that about 4 or 5 years ago, elected members at the time of what was then the Employment Committee asked for an annual update of employment cases, which would include all of our formal discipline, grievance and employment tribunal cases. I think what is important to note is that we've moved on quite a lot since then. I thought it might be useful if I just give you a bit of context of some of the things that have happened since then. And then while I'm giving the update, you can then decide whether you're still finding this useful and whether you want me to come again next year or whether you want us to do this in a slightly different format in the future. So since the Baker report, some time ago, which you will be aware of, a lot of things have happened within the service, both internally in terms of looking at scrutiny and particularly looking at our culture, so some of the stuff that Richard has been touching upon, and also the links within formal cases. So in accordance with our policies, we have a role which is called a SPOC, so a senior point of contact, which is appointed for every single case that we get in. They're responsible for making sure that the case is dealt with appropriately in accordance with the policy and procedures, but also looking at consistency of action with cases across the piece. So we've done some work in terms of making sure those senior points of contact share learning from cases, because we're a learning organisation, and looking at then what we can do proactively to prevent some of these cases in the future and some of the more work that we need to do with employees and with managers So that work is ongoing and has been very successful. We've also, within our senior leadership team meetings, we meet every month, we've had regular meetings looking at culture, so the links again with the work that Richard's doing, but also some of the impact on what that means in terms of discipline cases, whether they're formal or informal within the service, and what do we need to do differently to make sure that we're addressing those and taking a robust stance where required, but also trying to help and reassure staff, train staff, give information out to staff to try and prevent these cases occurring. I've also met recently with the Senior Leadership Board to look at a sort of reinvigoration of some of our messaging out to our workforce, and things like, what do we mean? We say things like zero tolerance. What do we mean by that? What does that actually mean? And the board are working on a statement at the moment to go out to all of our workforce so that people are aware of what that means. And we've also worked quite successfully in the past with the Fire Brigade Union as well, so that we do some joined up working to make sure again that we learn the lessons from those cases. So in terms of, internal governance and scrutiny, those are some of the things that we do. I think it's also important to note that over the last couple of years with COVID, we haven't been out and about on our stations and departments as often as we would like. So HR have recently recruited 2 new HR business partners, and we've completely restructured our team. So that's a big thank you to the Senior Leadership Board, who supported our business case just before Christmas and allowed that extra investment into the HR team. And to supplement the training that Richard has talked about, so some of the formal training that we do with managers, it's also around coaching. It's about going out, being very visible out on our stations. One, so that we can help managers and colleagues identify any potential inappropriate behaviour or conduct and deal with that at the earliest stage, because it's always best to deal with it informally and proactively rather than something becoming a formal discipline case. But also, more importantly, that I think once we're more visible out on stations, if people have got a concern but for whatever reason felt unable to raise that, so particularly when we're talking about bullying and harassment, people may feel concerned about raising that. It's quite a brave thing to do sometimes, to be able to raise that, and you also have to have confidence that the organisation is going to address the things that you bring to attention. So what we're hoping is that those visits have started. My 2 HR business partners only started on the 16th of May, but they've already been out and about and sort of working more frequently out on stations. So I think that will also bring about some really positive changes within the service. And also external scrutiny. We have HMI inspections, obviously, as you know, and they look at discipline and grievance cases. So they come in, they meet with me and my team, they look at all of the cases that we've dealt with, and they also look at the data from that on an annual basis. So it's just to give you some sort of reassurance that we have, in addition to the meeting here, other areas of sort of governance and scrutiny that takes place. So I think also important to note is that before I go into the detail of some of the cases, we have 850 staff. So when I talk about the numbers, I'll also talk about the percentages. So actually it's very low level numbers, but obviously every case, it's unfortunate whenever we have a discipline case, so it's appropriate that we do review them and look at the statistics and look at any trends that come out of that. So this report is obviously covering the previous operational year, so that's from the 1st of April 2021 up until the 31st of March 2022. So in that period, we had 5 grievances, in the previous operational year, and in this last year we had 1 grievance, and that is detailed in the table in your report at 5.2, and that was from an operational member of staff, a female operational member of staff, who's claimed bullying and harassment both individually on her particular watch, but also a wider culture of perceived sexism and inappropriate behaviour. I think I need to exercise some caution at this stage because this case is still ongoing, and you will also note that there is an employment tribunal pending as well from the same employee. So it would be very difficult for me to answer any questions on that case. And what I can reassure you is that we've appointed an external investigator to deal with that case. partly because sometimes some of our managers struggle with their workloads to expedite investigations very quickly. So we felt that by investing, getting somebody independent and external in, they would be able to deal with this very, very quickly, but also would give that really independent scrutiny. So I've got a meeting actually later on this afternoon with the senior point of contact for that case, who is Angela Feeney, the Director of Corporate Services, and the external investigator. But my understanding is that investigation is almost concluded and a report should be submitted fairly quickly, and obviously then we'll need to look at the lessons learnt from that case and whether any formal disciplinary action should be taken, and also to support that employee. And we're working with the solicitors in terms of the employment tribunal that relates to that particular case. In terms of discipline cases, we had 11 formal discipline cases compared to 11 in the preceding year, so the same level of cases. And I've given you a table below which details some of those, so I didn't propose to go through them individually. I think we have outlined some of the trends that have occurred, which is around some performance and attendance capability. So what I mean by attendance capability is people that have been off maybe for a long time and maybe haven't followed our procedures, and sometimes at some stage they've become almost absence without leave, so they haven't actually put the relevant paperwork in place to demonstrate whether they're off sick or whether they're off for another reason. So you'll see one of the cases relates to that. In terms of performance capability, we don't currently have a capability policy, and there's a bit of history to that, and it was mainly around sort of trade union reticence of having a capability process. So it would seem normally quite strange for an organisation to take those people through a discipline process when actually sometimes it's just about, for various reasons, they may not be capable of doing the job that they have been employed to do. And obviously we give them a huge amount of help and support to try and get them up to the standard that is required. But if they're unable to achieve that, at present it goes through the disciplinary process with some adjustments to recognise that this isn't a willful act. This is somebody that's maybe struggling for various reasons to meet the requirements within their job description. So a capability policy is being drafted as part of the transformation project, and I think that will take those cases away from this process and into a slightly different arena. You will notice that 3 cases related to the same incident, which was property damage whilst on duty. That case has been concluded some time ago, and you will see that the sanctions were awarded to those individuals. There was a difference in the sanctions that were awarded, and that was because one of those members was a manager, and so obviously we expect a higher threshold of conduct and behaviour from that manager. So that's where you will see that there's different sanctions awarded in that case. You will also note that some cases relate to conduct outside of the workplace. The National Fire Chief Council issued a code of ethics back on the 17th of May 2021, and we've worked very closely with the Chief, who was very actively involved in developing that piece of work to implement that within the service. But we've still got more work to do to try and make sure that staff are aware that they're not only ambassadors for Avon Fire and Rescue Service when they're in uniform and in work, but also that extends outside of the workplace. So there's some communications that we've sent out. So, for example, recently, social media. It can be a very, very powerful and very positive tool, but also if it's used incorrectly, it can also cause some issues for us. So we've sent out some communications working with our communications team only yesterday, just to remind staff of the caution that they need to take when we're putting things on social media, and also sometimes that things can be filmed, videoed by people with their mobile phones, etc., and that potentially could bring us into disrepute. So there's a piece of proactive work that is going on to identify that particular issue and to make sure that people are aware that they need to behave in accordance with the values and the code of ethics at all times, and not just within working hours. And you will note that there was one grievance discipline case which I've mentioned to, which is around bullying and harassment. We are reviewing the bullying and harassment policy, and we've also obviously looked at the culture survey results, which give us a slightly different picture in terms of the number of people that said anonymously within the survey that they've either directly been a victim of bullying and harassment or they've witnessed it. compared to the numbers of cases, which we've only had one case. So there's a piece of work that we need to do there, which we've already started on. So Richard and I work very, very closely together. But it's about making sure, as I've said before, we're really visible and that we've got various different mechanisms that if people feel that they've been bullied and harassed or that they've witnessed something that potentially is bullying and harassment, that they've got different people that they can come to, whether that's HR, whether that's the equalities team, whether that's their trade union rep, their local line manager, a member of the staff engagement network. So it's given them all of those different sort of avenues to be able to raise those issues. So there's definitely a piece of work that we're carrying on to make sure that we are also taking action. So I think sometimes people feel that they may not raise things because they're not confident it will get addressed robustly enough. So I think we're giving out constant reassurance, and definitely the chief has been very, very proactive in making sure that we do that on a continued basis in terms of all of his communications, and also the piece of work I talked about earlier around zero tolerance. I think that piece of work will also help to make staff more understanding of what our stance is on some of these issues. So I don't know whether you want me to stop there before I go on to employment tribunals in case you've got any questions.
I believe Adam would like to ask a question.
So I maybe have two questions. So on the damaging of somebody's property, and I appreciate 3 members of staff were sanctioned.
Yes.
So that was clearly one event, which was going to be my original question. Is that just coincidence or was that one event? But then does that... So what you haven't said is, and I appreciate those individuals being sorted and that's been dealt with, but does that indicate there is an issue at that location with a culture, or was that just an event that got out of hand and people thought something was funny and it just got a little bit out of hand? And then, but then if I just ask my other question as well, I appreciate you can't talk about the employment tribunal and the allegations of bullying, and that has to do the whole thing, and that's right. But will that be reported back to members in terms of a lessons learned exercise? We don't need the detail, but we need to know that we've recognised what could have been done better, and that's been changed.
Yeah. So in answer to the first question in terms of culture within that particular watch and station, I think it's in terms of the manager, absolutely we expect all of our managers across all of our workplaces to set the culture, because every workplace has a subculture, don't they? We talk about the culture of Avon Fire and Rescue Service, but there's lots of subcultures. So absolutely that was why the manager got a more severe sanction than the firefighters. Those sanctions have now finished in terms of the formal sanctions. Sorry, one of them is still, I think, a couple of months left to run. But it's also around looking at the informal lessons to be learned in terms of action plans, improvement plans, and very much working with the station manager, because there was some history to this, and it does relate to employee relations and some stuff around union membership and things. So there were some sort of different layers to this case. So I think it was a one-off in terms of that particular event, but I do definitely think that the messages need to be clear across all of our workforce about what, again, this is kind of links back to the zero tolerance in terms of what is banter and a prank and what actually is very clearly inappropriate behaviour and where that threshold is. So I don't know whether that helps. It's difficult to, without going into too much detail, to fully answer.
Without going into detail, try to answer the question.
In terms of the answer to the second part of your question around the employment tribunal, I think that was what I was meaning at the out when I sort of set the context at the beginning of this paper. It's very difficult within this meeting to be fully open and transparent and really respect the fact of governance and scrutiny, but also protecting our employees and also maybe any of the victims of these things. So I think it's around, does this format work for all of you? Or would something different work more effectively? And of course, you're almost always more than welcome to spend some time with me and my team on a more informal basis if it would help for you to understand more of the detail of the cases, and also how Richard and I work together to make sure that we are learning the lessons from these cases, but also then making sure that we have all of those actions across the organisation arising from it. So that was just something that I wanted you to sort of have a think about in terms of what would work most effectively for you. I don't know, Chief, whether you wanted to come in there and add anything to that.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think if I just go back to your first question, Councillor, really, this is also around much wider messaging across our service. This is part of one of my priorities around accelerating our cultural journey, around personal responsibility and accountability and the role that you have, and how we will take a consistent and proportionate approach to incidents where that doesn't meet our expected standards of either behaviour or conduct or performance in the workplace. And that is a really key area, and how everyone, not just our leaders in our organisation, everybody has a responsibility to uphold that. Everybody has a responsibility to call that out where they observe that or challenge that behaviour. And in doing so, that will build strong and positive relationships across our service. It will continue to reinforce as being an inclusive service for all, and where every member of our staff is feel valued and that could contribute. And that is one of my 3 top priorities that I've placed. And as Karen said there, what I'm constantly reinforcing as I go around the service. And we are, as Karen has also referenced, just developing a statement based on what our staff have told us, which we'll cover the next agenda item in relation to our feedback from our cultural survey, around what is it that we mean by zero tolerance. You know, what is our position as a service in terms of a consistent approach to identifying areas that we need to learn lessons, but also address aspects within the workplace which falls below our expected standards, and that everyone has the key role to play in there, and it's not just about leaders, it's about all of us. So we are, thankfully, as Karen said, in terms of a percentage level, the number of incidents that we have are relatively low, which is thankful. It's very good, but nevertheless, you know, that doesn't mean that we need to be complacent in this area. It's really important that we continue to reinforce what our expectations are, and as I've said, really my main aim is ensure that we have good relationships across our service, both with interactions with each other and both with industrial relations, but also around building that trust right the way through the service as well. Really key areas of my focus in ensuring that we have a very positive culture in our organisation, and everybody is valued and appreciated and can contribute when they come to the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for that confirmation of the status. To come back to your question, Karen, about whether we think this is a valid reporting format, I think it's essential that we get these figures presented to people in culture. Whether this is the right format, because this is only the second time I've had this report presented, I think we probably need to have an offline conversation about that, and whether the information is accessible enough for us to actually do proper scrutiny of it.
Absolutely, and like I say, you've all got my email address. You're more than welcome to come in and either talk to me about any particular cases if you've got questions that you want to raise offline, or if you want to come in and spend some time with my team so that we can sort of talk you through in more detail some of the cases. But if you're ready for me just to move on and finish with the Employment Tribunal aspect of the,
yes, please,
of the paper. So there are a number of cases. So one is what we call an early conciliation claim. So before something goes to an employment tribunal, it goes to ACAS first, as to say that this potentially would go to tribunal, and is there a way that you can conciliate to prevent any further action being taken. So I think this was one, unfortunately, where somebody had resigned. They then put in a claim through ACAS, but they hadn't raised the issues previously with us. I think if they had, we would have been able to. There was a bit of a breakdown between them and their line manager, and if we'd been aware of that, we would have hopefully been able, through mediation or some other work, to resolve that and maybe prevented a resignation. So you will see that some work was done between HR, the individual, and ACAS, and that case didn't go any further. It couldn't be resolved because they'd already left, but it actually didn't go forward to a formal employment tribunal case. The second one you may be aware of that I've mentioned to you previously. This case dates back to July 2019, and it focuses on a selection process for whole-time apprentice firefighters, where a candidate failed the selection process because they were unable to climb the ladder, and they got rejected on that basis. But they raised a claim saying that they believed that there was discrimination in that decision that was made. So it went to Employment Tribunal, and the Employment Tribunal rejected that person's claim. They then went to appeal, and the appeal upheld part of the complaint and has sent it back to the Employment Tribunal to make another judgment on that case. So obviously it's gone on now for 3 years, and I don't know at this point in time whether it will go forward to a full tribunal or not. So again, I'll keep you updated on that case. The two outstanding Employment Tribunal cases which are in process is one for a former employee who's a non-operational male member of staff who claimed constructive dismissal and discrimination on the grounds of sex, disability and age. So the HR team have been working on that one quite extensively over the past 6 to 12 months. I think what you may be aware of is through COVID, a lot of these cases are taking much longer than they would do normally to get to a full employment tribunal. So they've listed what they call a preliminary hearing for the 29th of September for that case, and that's where the judge will make an assessment as to whether that case has any validity to it and whether there is sufficient evidence in the fact that the response that the service has put forward back to the Employment Tribunal to say whether that case should continue or not to a full tribunal. So that one again I can update you on later on in the year. And the final one, which linked to the grievance that I mentioned at the outset of this paper, has only recently been submitted. It is quite unusual to have an Employment Tribunal claim lodged before the internal process has taken place. Normally an employee would raise a grievance, allow that process to take its course, and then if they weren't happy with that, they might then lodge a tribunal. But on this one, we've almost had them running in parallel at the moment. So again, I think the tribunal will obviously be very mindful of that, and that's why they've listed the preliminary hearing for the 24th of November, because obviously the grievance outcome should happen within the next month or so, and then we can report back to the tribunal to let them know what action we've taken, and then the judge again in November will make a judgment on whether that case progresses to a full tribunal. I hope that makes sense. I don't know whether anyone's got any questions.
No, it doesn't look like we've got any questions, and thank you for that report, Karen. It's very comprehensive.
The recommendation was just again to note the report, Chair.
Yeah, just to note. So then now we can move on to the cultural change update, which I think Richard is speaking against.
Okay, thank you. As you members will remember, earlier this year we commissioned Opinion Research Services to conduct our second culture survey, or our culture survey rerun, following after the 2018 survey. To provide us a snapshot of our progress against those themes identified in the first culture survey, and give us an idea of what we still need to do going forward. So this report provides a summary of the focus groups, which is the second part of the culture survey. And it follows on from the quantitative survey, as I mentioned, was earlier this year. It also provides an insight into some of the emerging themes from this survey, particularly around negative responses from 3 key groups, which include the 10-year plus service, corporate staff, and those who had experienced discrimination, prejudice, bullying and harassment. And also this report proposes the next steps in evolving our culture into the future here at Avon Fire and Rescue Service. You've already seen the first report, the quantitative report, which highlighted that there has been movement in terms of our progress against actions for the culture change. The survey was completed by 35% of the organisation, which was considerably lower than the first culture survey, which where 70% of staff responded. That left 539 staff members who actually didn't even open the email, the invitation email for this time, and that is an area that we will be investigating as part of our work going forward to understand why that is the case. If I can just move to the key findings, because I'm sure that's the interesting part of it. It was certainly highlighted that during the COVID-19 pandemic, attitudes towards staff changed significantly, and there was certainly highlighted a more positive, caring, and thoughtful relationships within the organisation, which certainly through this report is highlighted as continuing, which is a really positive thing, and obviously we want to keep that progressing as well. Also, senior managers, it was highlighted they were far more visible and willing to proactively engage with staff, giving praise and thanks where necessary and where needed. Also a lot more training and development on offer for staff, which I think a little bit later on when I talk through the gender pay gap, I think there's some evidence there that has actually paid off in terms of progressing staff up and encouraging them to actually go for higher positions and more leadership positions. There were quite a few areas for consideration, quite a lot more actually than the sort of positive areas of progress, but as we know, culture change does take a long time, and obviously the pandemic has impacted quite heavily on progress in this. But some of the sort of areas for consideration was highlighted. The managers, middle managers, senior managers should be equipped with better tools to address inappropriate behaviour, and obviously Karen's covered quite a lot of that. And some of our work in DICE is also aimed at helping managers address issues at an early stage to stop them from escalating out of control and obviously impacting on other departments in terms of their time and resources. So that will all be part of the DICE training that I'm planning at the moment. We've already heard mentioned about the zero tolerance approach to bullying and harassment, and it was quite a significant part of the report that did highlight key areas of bullying, harassment and discrimination, in particular around race and ethnicity, which I had noticed that in the Baker report and the previous culture survey wasn't raised as an issue, and this time it has been. So again, further investigation as to why that is, and given the fact that our numbers of BAME staff are still quite low, that is quite concerning, to be perfectly honest. So there will be further investigation into that. There was also a need for better communication around the need to diversify the organisation. It was still felt by participants that there are key pockets of mistrust and misunderstanding around the use of things like positive action to encourage females and BAME staff to join the organisation, but more in particular the attitudes of particular staff towards women when they reach station after training, as to whether standards were lowered, or is positive action fair, or is it positive discrimination. So there is a lot more communication, a lot more awareness raising around our methods for diversifying the organisation, and certainly to highlight the benefits of doing so. Training and development for staff, and especially our watch managers. I mentioned earlier that there will be a lot more focus on supervisory managers, understanding benefits of diversity, but also how to tackle inequality and remove barriers from their processes as well. And a focus also and a concern that the legacy issues highlighted in the first culture survey still remain. So that's the command and control, focus on whole time aspects of the organisation, and the continued division between operation and corporate services. So those key areas are certainly going to form part of the culture change action plan, which will be formed out of the Making Avon Fire and Rescue Service a Better Place to Work, which also will be renewed this year. And again, will also form some of the objectives under the DICE strategy as well. From a personal point of view, when I came into the organisation in 2018, and that was just following the Baker Report and the Culture Survey, I can certainly say that the level of morale was extremely low, but since I've been here and working with teams and understanding the organisation better, I can certainly say that things have improved, and there's lots of green shoots for improvement. There's a lot more conversation around culture in areas where we wouldn't expect it, particularly operational. And I think a lot more people willing to be engaged and embed these values as well. So even though the outcome of this report may indicate that there is obviously a lot more work to do and a lot of areas for consideration, I think it's important to know that major improvements have been made, and I think that's been reflected in that focus group report. So in terms of next steps, I've talked about revising Making Avon Fire and Rescue Service a Better Place to Work, and that will be done this year, and out of that will form a new culture change action plan, which we'll obviously work against. We aim to continue increasing staff engagement levels in terms of promoting equality, diversity, and driving forward the culture and embedding our values, as well as disseminating the core code of ethics across the organisation, ensuring that all heads of departments use that as a guide to tackling inappropriate behaviour and promoting better working relationships. We'll continue to work with HR in terms of recruitment. And as I mentioned, we've attended 3 recruitment events this year, and we will continue to work with our external partners to do that. We also have a focus on creating safe spaces. Last year, I created the BAME network, and again, due to capacity issues, that has tailed off slightly this year, but we'll be reinstating that this year. I know we've been looking at a menopause working group, also a gender working group, and also neurodiversity, which is something that is emerging quite steadily this year in the organisation. So there will be a strong focus on neurodiversity and all the sort of areas that fall under that umbrella. We'll also be introducing quarterly snapshot surveys as well, which we'll conduct internally to understand our progression in a shorter period of time, so we can then start to fine-tune areas where there is persistent inappropriate behaviour or lack of development in terms of diversity and equality, and where there is still areas of bullying and harassment. I think that's all I'll cover on that one. If there's any questions, I'd be quite happy to answer them.
Thank you, Richard. Brenda has a question, and so does Shelley and Donald.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of more of comments rather than questions, because I've been having quite lengthy discussions with Richard about this, and I feel this is one of the most important things we need to get right. If our employees are not happy, and we can understand what the reason is, we can do something about it. So credit to Richard for all the hard work he's putting in on this. And I just wanted to pick up a few points. One of the comments in there is about SLT members being keen to start visiting fire stations, and Simon and I have just restarted that. It was quite interesting that when I was there, because I had previously visited Southmead Fire Station, but then we had the pandemic in the middle, so everything stopped. And obviously the jungle drums had got going because something I said there was played back to me in a different fire station. So it obviously does go around. So I'm going to be really careful what I say in future. Otherwise it's going to get held against me. But, you know, we have to make sure that the culture here is appropriate, that people feel valued, and also that they do want to complete these surveys, because that's the only way we can find out what's going on. And the fact that it's such a low percentage response is really worrying for me. Most of my working life was spent in BT, and we did annual care surveys at every time and really took notice of them, and I was part of a team that we got involved, so this is very appropriate from my point of view. And there's a lot of good things in there that we have obviously managed to improve, but there's an awful lot of work still needs to be done, and I'm really keen that all members of the Fire Authority understand that, and we'll work together to improve it, because our employees are vital. Without them and them being happy, or at least reasonably happy with what they do, we're not going to get anywhere. So I just hope everybody will join in and help with this, because it is so important. Thank you.
Shelley?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks very much. It was a really interesting report. And just coming back to touching back onto what Brenda was just talking about, actually, that you mentioned that this response rate is actually not bad compared with other results with other typical public sector organisations, and having worked in some myself, I understand that. And I was just thinking, actually, just thinking about, there was another sort of section somewhere else, not in your report, about emails and how often people complained that they weren't targeted. They were sort of, it was a bit of a scattergun approach. You know, everybody gets this email, and we've all sort of experienced that. And having worked in various big institutions myself, you do sometimes think, oh, here's another one, and then amongst the other 20 you've got that day at least, and it is tempting just to think, well, actually I'll do it later, and then in the end you don't, despite maybe reminders. And whether also there's this thing about is there an expectation of change anyway? Do they see the point in filling in this survey? Because if it's going to take 10 minutes of their time, some other aspects that came through as results of comments that people thought, well, what's the point of reporting it, because nothing's going to happen. And I just wondered if, presumably there's an annual appraisal system, isn't there? I just wondered if this could be added to as a question on the appraisal system. Did you complete the survey? And this could be discussed in the actual appraisal. Oh, did you complete it? Was it useful for you? And then someone might say, well, no, I didn't. And it could be then investigated further, and that would be on a one-to-one basis rather than sort of in a big sort of focus group thing where even then people don't always comment. So I don't know if that could be something that could be.
That's a good idea, actually, to be honest, yeah.
I think that's excellent. We're doing a review of the whole appraisal system at the moment, because you're right, I think there's, again, it goes back to the training of our managers. Some of them are very good quality appraisals that are done, and those conversations happen. And they shouldn't just happen at appraisal time. Of course, these should be regular conversations that are happening all of the time with our workforce, but we're looking at all of the objectives, and also having objectives around culture and improvement, getting involved in terms of, you know, making us an employer of choice, making us attractive for all applicants, regardless of sort of diversity. So there's a lot of work that we need to do around the appraisal system. So it started, but I think that's definitely a really, really good point, which I'll take back to the manager that's leading on it. Sorry, Chief.
No problem, thanks Karen. The appraisal is one good avenue to explore. I think for us it's very easy to fall in trap around styles of communication and preferences. In the email communication, maybe common usage, a way of communicating with you during some areas of the organisation, perhaps less so. So our operational firefighters have less opportunity to access emails, if you like, and they're not the go-to place for communication. I think we need to revisit whether we've allowed sufficient time in the working day for an opportunity, and whether or not we have supported that rather than leaving people in their own preferences from that perspective. That's one avenue I think we need to review and consider in terms of the uptake. And also around, we are changing our platform for communication. We have quite a number of avenues, and one of the feedbacks we get from staff around the visits and chats that I have with staff around the work, the organisation, is that there are so many bits of information coming through to try and retain, and different methods of communication. And I know our corporate communications team have been working really hard with our transformation team in terms of how we utilise technology to improve that method of communication. So it's one singular platform rather than multiple forms coming in, because there's such a juggle when you've got other things from our operational firefighters. We've got to maintain their competencies. You know, we've got fire calls are engaging with our communities from prevention and protection perspective as well. And we've started to utilise the Microsoft Teams platform as a mechanism of a go-to place to get all of that information. But certainly I would agree, Councillor, that the annual appraisal is one mechanism. That could be said for the wellbeing conversation as well, around how we build that into individual responsibility, individual accountability, which I mentioned earlier on, around having those set basis for those wellbeing conversations. But also I think we need to take some lessons learned here as an organisation around our method of providing that opportunity to engage with us. And one thing that the Chair of the Authority, Brenda, and I learned as well from our recent communication visits is around, and I mentioned earlier on how we build that trust across the workforce. That you said, we did. Because not everybody sees or feels the changes that we've made. And undoubtedly, we have made some significant improvements. That's clear to see in our cultural report around some of the good things. We are a good organisation, a really good organisation. What we don't have a tendency to do is sometimes promote or recognise that, but also around how we feed back to our workforce, as I said, around the platform of, you said, this is what you said, this is what we've done in response of that. So people are kept informed, and we can build that trust around, actually, my voice is valued and I'm going to be listened to as a collective from that perspective. So there's many things that we need to review and consider in terms of lesson learned from this for our next time around.
Thank you. Let's go for one more question. Sorry, David, can I jump in again now? There was just one more. Just looking at the reaction, the feedback from the control room staff, I thought that was rather troubling, actually, that a lot of them had, or some of them had applied for other positions in the organisation and had actually actively been told, well, you know, we'd rather you didn't move right now because we've got no one else to take your place. And that seems to be rather sort of stopping progression for presumably sort of younger people, which is not really good for their careers at all, is it really? So I thought that was a bit troubling, really.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Fire control are quite unique, of course, because they're only a small team. And they're a critical part of our organisation. They're part of our emergency response. They're the first point of contact. So our priority needs to make sure we have the resourcing within there. So that can be a point of frustration when we're trying to provide movement and opportunities for progression and development for individuals, and how we can accommodate that with the percentage number of staff. We have had staff that have transferred for different roles from the fire control environment. We've had 2 move into the prevention teams, the protection team. We've had 1 go into learning and development. We've seconded staff out into special projects. So we've provided those opportunities, but there's a limit to what we can do, and that can be a point of frustration for some colleagues when they see that and they want to be part of that. So we have to manage that proportionately and appropriately. But we are certainly trying to open up avenues for different entry levels for the service, digression in career choices and opportunities as well as development. But I think, you know, we need to be mindful that it's a critical part of our organisation, and we need to, our priority is to make sure we have the right resources in that right place. Otherwise, we can't provide the service that we can, because they're such a critical function.
Don had a question.
Well, thank you first of all for the report, Richard, and the team behind you. I think that, I mean, I'm going to make a couple of general comments and some specific questions about the report. I mean, I guess we could say, given how many people responded to the previous survey, that the people who didn't respond may have been happy with what was going forward. I mean, certainly we always fill in surveys, we get some things we do, we tend to fill them in when we want to moan rather than when we want to say things are good. So perhaps we shouldn't be beating ourselves up too much on that. Just I mean, I appreciate we as elected members shouldn't get involved in terms of individual disciplinary cases, but going back to Karen's previous report, if we're trying to set flags, and going back to the case about the member of staff's equipment being damaged, a 3-month warning doesn't seem to me to be much more than sort of slap on the wrist, really, rather than saying this is inappropriate. So I do wonder whether what we do and what we say in terms of, and I appreciate I don't know the facts of the case, but certainly from my own personal experience in private industry, these things always sit on your record for at least 6 months, if not a year. And actually, if a manager did what we think he did, I suspect, or she did, of course, it may well be that person would no longer work for the organisation. So I do wonder whether we are in step between discipline and our cultural journey, because what's unacceptable should be seen to be very unacceptable. But I'll leave that, because I appreciate we shouldn't be involved. In terms of the actual paper itself, for me, having read through both of them, you know, the survey and the focus groups, I found the focus group stuff more interesting, actually. So I thought that was a bit more reflective of the whole organisation. And, you know, and thank you for that. It was pretty detailed, and, you know, answered most of the questions I had. A couple of points I'll make, 3 points I'll make on it. And I appreciate members may not be up to speed because it's a very big report, but under section 1.6 and 1.7 on page 126 of the report, around staff feeling undervalued, I mean, the very great disappointment for me was this idea about prevention being some sort of second-class thing you get sent into. I mean, I'd almost like us to be, as an organisation, saying that is the most important bit, because actually, when we have to send people out to emergencies, it proves that we've kind of not done it. And I appreciate that's a massive cultural switch for the fire service nationally and probably internationally, because it's much more exciting doing the second bit rather than the first bit. But I think in terms of some of the cultural journey stuff we do, that we need to make sure that part of our business, as it were, is deemed to be at the top of the list rather than what staff seem to perceive at the bottom of the list. Which I so appreciate that's a difficult thing to do, because it's overturning sort of 250 years of history, isn't it? In terms of agreeing with it, on that the next page after that, on the items 1.12 to 1.14 about slow decision making, if there was a members' survey, I'd certainly put my hand up to say I think we are incredibly slow at making decisions. And some of the stuff that we're talking about at the next fire authority meeting seems to have been rumbling on for 4 or 5 years. You know, some things, but we still talk about doing. So I do think culturally, lots of members will recognise that, if not members of staff. So I do wonder, Simon, under your renewed vigour of leadership, that kind of you could put that to the sort of top of your list, things to do. How do we do things more quickly? And so it's very disappointing, the points on 1.14 that people perceive they shouldn't be doing things because it might rock the boat and affect their promotion. Actually, going back to sort of private business, I kind of think, well, actually, it's a bit reverse for me, because you haven't done anything. Why should you be promoted? You know. And the final thing is, just going back to the points on page 160 and page 161, there's large areas of consideration, which I appreciate this is early days, and I'm certainly not expecting it now, but I guess the output from that would be in some of action plan moving forward, some of the points on that and how we can start to address them. Yeah. So I mean, that's just, I guess you're doing that, but it was just to say I'd agree we do need to do it.
Yeah, those areas that I agree there are more areas of consideration than what appears to be progression, and many of those will form the action plan that will be making Avon Fire and Rescue Service a better place. So yeah.
Chair, if I may,
Certainly, Tom.
I'm able to respond to Don's points. Councillor, I'll try and remember the bits and points you made. In terms of the discipline ones, with Karen's report, of course, it's always very difficult to each scenario has its particular detail surrounding it, which obviously needs to be taken in consideration and in determination. However, I think what the frustration is that we're picking up is staff would see that or hear about that and may perceive that to be what could be looked at as being an inconsistent approach for different scenarios. Hence why I think that reinforces the need for us to have a statement around what we mean by our zero tolerance approach and actually that consistency in how we apply our policy and our procedure and our approach to instances such as that nature. I think that might help to resolve that, but it's very difficult when, for confidentiality reasons, we can't communicate all of the information across the service, because what that leaves is a little bit of a gap that people tend to fill, and they make some assumptions, and then they may see some inconsistencies, which creates that, I guess, that lack of confidence around how we're going to approach. So I think our zero tolerance aspect will help that. In relation to your observations on page 126 of the quarterly report in terms of our protection teams, I thought that was a very interesting observation also, and I think here this is linked to my own personal assessment of that. It's probably linked to some level of legacy, whereas predominantly it's just been open to one part of our organisation. We have opened that up to career opportunities to increase the diversity within those teams, the experience they bring in, and the different conditions of service in which they're employed under. So that is going to take some time for some staff to get used to. Some staff will not see that as being a positive. We as a service see that as a positive. And I think that's really important around we continue to make sure that we have opportunities where we can increase diversity and career progression within our service. And my reflection on that, I think that's built on a little bit of legacy. And I think I've probably covered the point around the zero tolerance aspect, but also just on your point around quicker, and the challenge to myself, Councillor, around being quicker. It is a frustration around the agility of the service, particularly because of our procedures, contractual, procurement procedures, financial procedures, good, and making sure that we have good governance as well, which can sort of slow things down, but it can be a frustration around our agility. Hopefully that helps, Councillor.
Any other members? Because I'd like to make a quick comment. So thank you, Richard, for your report, and I'm really interested in that there's no mention of the whistleblowing process in this document, because as I was reminded, it is in the Constitution today. Do you feel that enough staff have the ability to make use of the whistleblowing process?
Let's cover that one.
Yeah, please.
I think staff are all aware of it. It's definitely, again, it's about repeated communications. I think picking up on definitely Councillor Bromley's point earlier and the thing that the Chief was running. We have many policies and lots of different things that staff can do to raise things, and sometimes some of our staff genuinely will still say they're not aware of it. So I think the whistleblowing policy, it's very easily available. I would hope that people wouldn't need to go through the whistleblowing policy because there are all of these other mechanisms. So I think we need to address that first. But I do think that probably it's just repeated, working with our communications team, those repeated communications to remind staff of it. But what I would hope is that they can have those conversations either with their immediate line manager or with one of us or somebody else to raise those issues before it resulting in a whistleblowing scenario would be what I would hope, if that answers your question.
Thank you, yes. Don, you're motioning for a question?
No,
okay.
I was motioning meetings, I was motioning.
Can I just make another point?
Certainly, Richard, yes.
So there's two areas really that I probably not highlighted that well, but are mentioned. So one is around new recruits, and we've recruited quite heavily, increased numbers in whole-time firefighters, for example, but also in corporate services. And I have a slot at the training school to do DICE update or awareness training. And my observation of the recent intakes are an improvement in diversity, not necessarily visible and covering some of the two key areas, women and BAME, but there has been a definite increase. Also, what is noticeable is that it's a younger generation coming through, and for me that reflects a change, a natural change, that a process that's going to happen, because these younger generations have come through a society that is far different than the 10-year plus staff that we've got at the moment. And so over time, you know, you will have some of those 10-year staff plus, 10-year plus, sorry, staff leaving, natural retirement, and these new recruits coming in. So that will also change the profile of the organisation, but also what will happen in between will be the meeting of a new generation with an older generation, and that hopefully there will be some challenging of behaviours, and certainly as a father of young children, there is a certain change in attitude in how people are treated, along with a distinct need to self-identify. And I think it's important for us as an organisation to recognise that even though we get categories given to us by Office of National Statistics, people are more likely to identify in different ways, and we need to be ready to accept that and have our policies, process and our working environment conducive for that. And just the other area as well is in terms of culture change. I think there's two distinct kind of areas, and obviously one is people, which is heavily focused in terms of this report, but there's also the structure of an organisation as well. And with a transformation team working on policies and processes and impact assessment and other key areas, I think that the changes there will also help make our processes a lot slicker, reduce a lot of stress, which can be misinterpreted as, you know, possibly bullying and harassment. So I think that's also something that's in the process as well.
Thank you. I believe Ruth wants to come in.
I don't know if this is the right time to say this, but you all know that I'm very involved with my fire station, and I wanted to say at this point that I am told that their morale has gone up and that their communication process is much improved. I think it's worthy that we know this, that it is happening, and that they're telling me this. And in fact, yesterday they told me, you know, and I'm pleased about that. It's working. I just wanted to say it now.
Thank you, Ruth. Everybody prepared to move on to note this report? Anything else? Anything else to say? So thank you very much, Ruth. This committee notes this report. Thank you. And next up is the Learning and Development Quarterly report from Vaughan.
Right. Yeah, this report provides you with an update on operational training and organisational development currently, and the People and Culture Committee are asked to note the content of this report, and obviously I'll take any questions you have at the end of my delivery. Firstly, some of the key considerations from a training delivery perspective. We've now moved the breathing apparatus requalification course to Hicksgate. This has allowed us to train or requalify up to around 40 personnel per month, as obviously we have 484 operational staff who all need requalifying in breathing apparatus, so we need to look at different ways of how we can do that more and expedite that process more quickly. Recently we carried out a qualification report which showed 53 firefighters as being out of date for BA, or breathing apparatus, sorry. As is always the case with anything like this, that's just a particular snapshot at one moment in time, and when we had further analysis it was identified then that 17 of these personnel had already had their requalifier booked. 19 for other reasons hadn't been requalified, such people as those on modified duties, those on sickness leave, those being over 60 who hadn't had their requalify or reschedule, because we don't expect people over 60 to wear BAs. They carry out other duties on the fire ground. And that left us with 17 personnel who have since had their BA requalifiers booked in, and they will be completed within the next month or so. So we're in a much stronger position than it would appear from the snapshot report. Linking to the Grenfell Tower inquiry, we've been carrying out the Phase 1 initial training since April of this year, and that's right from firefighter up to Assistant Chief Officer level. And Phase 2 will be taking place starting in mid-June, or mid this month, sorry, until the middle of the summer, and that will be looking at working in conjunction with Bristol City Council and utilising high-rise buildings to ensure that we have the most skilled, and ensure that our staff are up to date with the most technical procedures and the best possible way of dealing with any incident, which, touch wood, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does, we will be in a very strong position to deal with any incident in our service area. Moving over to Seven Park, the annual training plan began in April of this year, and predominantly our training at Seven Park this year will be focused on recruit training, linking back to the discussions that Richard and Karen have just had about the number of recruits we're taking on. We've had, this year there will be 2 24-place whole-time training schools, so that's 48 new people coming into the organisation, bringing with them that new outlook on the service, skills from other areas, a different diversity of thought, as well as diversity of appearance across the service. And we also have 3 20-place on-call courses taking place, of which Avon will have 10 personnel on each course, so that will be another 30 personnel into the on-call establishment. Again, with the work that's been taking place with Richard and his team and our communication officers and our inclusion officers across the service area, then that will show that will increase the diversity of the service. Not as much as we would like, but obviously it's a movable feast. By moving the BA courses from Seven Park, this has allowed us, for the recruits courses to take place without any distraction from other courses taking place, and has allowed us to focus entirely upon those recruits at that venue. But what it's also done is freed up the meeting space at Seven Park. Obviously, you're aware that we work on a points basis at Seven Park, and we have certain numbers of points to spend. So we are able now to utilise that venue more for meetings. We hold SLT meetings there, which gives us the opportunity to be away from the digital environment and Zoom, and all to be in the same place and have that much greater interaction with the leaders of the service, as obviously everyone in that meeting owns all of the risk, all of the people and all of the finance across the service. So it's important that you do have that ability to meet in that large meeting space at Seven Park. Also, there are plans to utilise it in the future for fire authority meetings. Obviously, this room's a little cramped for what we need, and there are bigger rooms at Seven Park which we will be able to utilise, and utilise the points, so it won't come at any additional cost to the service. We've carried out a great deal of hazardous material and malicious threat training across the service. Basically, things like marauding terrorist attack training. We've carried out that across the service in partnership with Gloucester, South West Ambulance Service Trust, and also with some special forces input as to how we should protect our staff as best as possible in those environments, and how we would operate there working with other agencies. By the time that training has completed, we'll have a number of specialist teams, i.e. the NILO officers or National Interagency Liaison Officers, to carry out their roles at such incidents. Teams from Hicksgate and Clevedon who will be able to enter the hazard zone, or the hot zone if you like, where the incident is clearly taking place and that critical assistance is required. But also all our staff will be classified as non-specialist responders, so any incident that did occur, which again, touch wood, it doesn't, but if any marauding terrorist attack occurred in the Avon area, all of our staff would be trained to deal with it in some shape or form, that we would be able to operate in the various elements that an incident of that nature would throw up for us. Moving on to the national resilience picture, that's where the national resilience being assets we hold within the service area, which are national assets. So if there was an incident somewhere else, we could be called away from Avon to deliver that specialist resource elsewhere. If you think of the floods or the dam that was about to burst up in Derbyshire, we had teams from Avon went there with our high volume pumping capabilities and specialists to assist with that effort. So it's not just about looking after Avon, it's about being part of our national picture and our national asset. We've recently had our hazardous detection, identification and monitoring capability assessed. We perform very well as a service with no improvements identified. Our mass decontamination unit capability, which again is a national asset, has also been assessed with no improvements noted. So that's pleasing to see that we're not just protecting Avon as a whole, we're also providing those national assets and proving successful when we're being reassessed and requalified. The Urban Search and Rescue, or USAR, as is termed, capability based at Hicksgate, is due to receive a similar assurance audit visit that described above in that quarter, and obviously that will be reported back to this meeting at the next People and Culture Committee. Technical rescue-wise, the National Fire Chiefs Council have recently released a rescue boat code. Previously, for our swiftwater rescue boat training, it was quite expensive to go to the Menai Straits. Obviously, personnel then had to move. We think of the culture of the organisation and people's well-being. People had to travel up to the Menai Straits up in North Wales on a Sunday evening. They'd be there for most of the week. They'd come back at the weekend, so they'd be away from their family, causing issues family-wise and a number of other things. We've seconded a firefighter into the learning and development team from Bath, who was already an experienced boat operator with a passion for this area of the service. And they've developed a course which we'll be able to deliver, and indeed we'll start delivering that in June of this year or later on this month. And that will be carried out in the Severn Estuary, where we've been able to replicate the conditions that we received in the Menai Straits. The reason the Menai Straits was used is a national thing, that it was the only place you could replicate the type of conditions you needed to gain the qualification in the swiftwater boat use. But we've been able to, with the work of the tech rescue team, learning and development, and the firefighter on secondment, we're now able to deliver that within the Severn Estuary. So it's a great asset for us that potentially in the future that's something we could offer to other services as a means of generating income for the service. But more importantly for us, it means we can train our teams much quicker, much easier, without that impact on their family life also, so making it much more attractive for them. Moving on to organisational development, I mentioned the recruits courses. The first recruits course that ran this year was ran as our first firefighter apprenticeship recruit school, and then that course was 2 weeks longer than the usual training school would have been, and that's to allow input from Western College on topics such as values, equalities and inclusion. Obviously, that's something we've talked about extensively in this meeting and is vitally important to us. Safeguarding, so about identifying those risks when we're out in the community to safeguard others. Personal development, obviously we want to create firefighters of the future and leaders of the future to move through the organisation. It's about managing change, unconscious bias, self-awareness and problem solving and decision making, so things that they potentially wouldn't have had on previous recruits course, but that's been delivered by specialists from Western College. And the recruits also undertook a 2-day mental health course aimed at them as individuals. So different from mental health first aid course we run through Mind, which is about around other people's mental health and supporting them. So this was about identifying mental health issues within yourself and supporting yourself, as well as being able to support others, which is obviously vitally important. All 24 recruits are now on station and are progressing well. And then there'll be various touch points back with Western College as part of the apprenticeship agreement to ensure they are progressing to where they need to be. And then at the end of the 2-year development programme as an apprentice, there will be an end-point assessment, upon which time they will qualify as fully fledged firefighters and then continue with their watches whilst the other apprentice schools come behind them. And as I say, the second apprentice recruit school started in April this year, and Karen and the HR team are currently recruiting for a February 2023 school. So then another 24 personnel. So if you look at the number of the 3 recruits courses and the 3 on-call recruits courses, that's in excess of 100 new people into the organisation of all sorts of diversities and backgrounds. So that's proving that we are moving forward. The recruitment is there, and we are looking to increase that diversity across the service area. Development pathways for staff who are already in service. We launched those in September 2021. There was a significant piece of work took place around the development pathways, and that's about setting a clear path for development and the skills needed to progress through the organisation and what's expected of people at each level. So if you can look at the development pathway document, see where you'd like to find yourself in the future in the organisation, and then you can clearly identify via personal development and the appraisal interviews, which Councillor Bromley mentioned, where you hope to go in the future and what you need to do, because it's not just about the service providing things for you. There is that expectation. The personnel will work for themselves and put that effort in to move themselves forward through the organisation. To supplement that, we have mentors across the service. Currently, we have 35 trained mentors to help someone who's new into a role, to mentor them through that role and give them that critical friend and that critical point of contact that they can work their way through any issues they may be having. There's a leadership academy, which is part of a new project which we're looking to develop based on Avon and Somerset's leadership academy. And basically that's a suite of development programs for aspiring staff who wish to become a supervisory manager. So this is about our first step on people's leadership journeys, because I think back to my own time, it is quite a big jump to go from being a firefighter and being part of the watch, or from a corporate services perspective, being part of a team to lead in that team. That suddenly, instead of you looking at other people to tell you how to manage your day, what you need to do, where you need to be, you're suddenly in that position where you are doing it the other way around. So it's about this leadership academy will give people those initial skills to move into that first role on that ladder, and that leadership ladder. We're also introducing a mediation skills training and a coaching skills course for managers, because obviously, as Richard alluded to, with the mediation skills at an early stage, you can nip some issues in the bud before they escalate and become a problem wider across the service. As with anything though, particularly training, there are risks involved, but across the service we expect our watch managers and unit leads to provide plans for the cohorts that they manage to ensure that their training is up to date. They keep on top of any requalification courses. Also, our resource planning unit uses the Firewatch system to ensure any requalification courses for our operational staff, such as driving and BAs, are planned. And then obviously, by achieving all this, it ensures gives us the ability to deliver the service plan, ensuring that the service has the right skills in the right place at the right time, at whatever level you operate in the service, whether you're a uniform member of staff or indeed a corporate member of staff, or if you hold a role in both, then you have to have the requisite skill set for each. And then by doing that, from the L&D team's perspective and the training perspective, we're ensuring then that we're able to deliver the service plan wider across the communities of Avon. And that's a whistle-stop tour of where we are with L&D at the moment. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
Thank you for that report, Vaughan. Who would like to open the floor? Shelley.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Vaughan. It's really interesting. Yeah, I just wanted to look at the mentoring. I just wondered how it works really. Is a mentor assigned one new recruit, or how does it operate really?
There's two stages. Obviously, there's the people who will volunteer to become a mentor and give something back to the rest of the organisation that may benefit from the skills that they've developed over the years. But it's also people requesting that they'd like to be mentored. Some people obviously feel comfortable enough that they can go into a new role without that mentorship or without anyone to turn to, and perhaps rely on their peers for any mentoring, which they'll be mentored but unofficially. So this basically the opportunity is there for everyone, A, to become a mentor, or B, to ask to be mentored. And it wouldn't just be one person would be a mentor and have one person they'd not look after, but they would mentor. There would be a number of people that would feed into the one person, because obviously we wouldn't have enough mentors to be for a one-to-one basis.
Anybody else?
Adam. At the start of your report, you referred to the breathing apparatus, and then at the end you said the Firewatch system picks up training needs. Yeah. And so I wasn't going to ask the question, but I would have thought the training needs of operational fire staff must be reviewed quite frequently, and so I was surprised that it was that higher number of people required retraining on breather apparatus. And have we then identified, just using that single snapshot, where maybe, because the tool is there in the software to advise people needs training, is the tool not being used effectively by watch managers or whoever to identify shortfalls in people's skill sets in terms of
compliance?
Yeah, the tool is being used as it should be, where it will highlight if people are out of compliance. But as I said, there was I don't want to use COVID as an excuse, but there was a significant backlog due to COVID where there were restricted numbers we could have used at Seven Park, which is why the training team took the decision to move the BA training away, because we were restricted on numbers at Seven Park and there was only certain people could attend. Previously we could have picked 3 or 4 people from different stations and attached them to another course, but then you're increasing the risk of infection, so that couldn't take place at the time. So yeah, so that snapshot isn't particularly pleasant reading, but when it was actually analysed, it boiled down to there were potentially around 17 people, which is less than 1 per station, which it isn't ideal, but on conversation with peers from other fire and rescue services, less than 1 person per station requiring requalifying and breathing apparatus is a fairly low figure in comparison to what it could be. If you think you've got a station of 40, 50 people, and then only 1 person is out of compliance, then that's not ideal, don't get me wrong, but there were a number of contributory factors as to why that figure showed up, why it did, but then obviously it was analysed and found that it wasn't quite as unfortunate as it looked on first sight.
Thank you, Adam. Richard.
Yeah, just a quick one, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it seems as though we've got quite a useful arrangement with Western College, and I just wondered about the sort of contract times on that at all. I don't know if you know when each particular element expires, or any of the detail on that. Not essential, if not.
The contract we have with Western College is an ongoing contract. There isn't an end point to it. It's we're signed up with Western College for the apprenticeship scheme. Obviously, we pay into the apprenticeship levy, and there needs to be a way of bringing that back into the service. And Western College is our preferred partner for the apprenticeship scheme, and that's something. Obviously, the recruits course that ran in January, the recruits course that's running now, the next recruits course in February of next year, and any subsequent recruit courses past that will be managed through the same arrangement with Western College.
Thank you. Thanks. There's no interim. That's handy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'll see any. Shall I move that we note this report then, please? Yeah, nods all round. Excellent. Thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is the date of the next meeting, which is...
no agenda.
Oh, sorry. My apologies, Richard.
You thought you got away with it.
Sorry, the next item is the gender pay gap reporting, and Richard's speaking to that one.
Thank you. So this year, we see that we've had a positive increase from in the pay gap from 0.7% to 18% in favour of female staff. That's the first time this has happened, but certainly we can track the reason for that. Just to sort of say since we've been reporting our pay gap, we've seen a reduction pretty much year on year, certainly in comparison to the national average, which currently stands at 7.9%. However, we have to be cautious around that figure because of the impact of the pandemic, and not in terms of collecting data from all organisations, and also us not having to report in 2020. So we'll probably have to see next year how that figure compares. But I'm still quite confident that our organisation still has that lower pay gap compared to the national average, which is positive. In terms of why have we seen that pay gap increase in terms of or in favour of female staff, I think we can look at the changes in the female staff representation in the quartile bands. So certainly an increase in staff representation in the middle upper and the mid lower quartile bands, and you'll have those figures there in the report. But I think probably also significant as well to note is that there has been a decrease in the lowest quartile bands, from 32% to 29%, from 32% last year to 29% this year. And without specific analysis on the reasons for that, I would probably say that that's down to opportunities to progress, the attendance on courses such as Springboard, Spring Forward, Stepping Up program as well. So I think there's a greater appetite for moving up the ladder in our sort of female staff population, which is again another positive, and I think also reflects the initiatives that we've been working on with DICE, culture, HR and corporate communications as well. So we will do a bit more analysis on that one, more deeper analysis. Obviously, if it is leaning towards that, then we obviously want to continue that and sustain that going forward. Also, other areas I think that there's probably helped in terms of that increases are the improvements that HR has made in terms of how we recruit. So I mentioned earlier the community and partnership database that we have that HR make great use of to send our adverts out to many different organisations in our community, but also external partners as well, accessing those huge networks that they all have. I think that's certainly paid off a lot. So we are advertising our roles into wider and more diverse areas, and I think the response has been a lot better. And also the delivery of unconscious bias training for recruiting staff that I think continues through all areas of recruitment. So that's really key and important as well. And also the values-based questionnaires during the application stage, during interviews. And I was just up at Control. What day is it? Sorry, Tuesday. Delivering training for the 6 new recruits there, and they actually did mention during that training session that they were impressed with the values-based questions and questionnaires on the recruitment process. So actually it is filtering through and is actually making a difference, and certainly attracting more staff that are aligned to our values, which is a positive step forward. Yeah, so obviously we're going to continue to improve the way that we encourage our female staff to go for promotion and go into areas where there is more progression, and obviously we're trying to keep that pay gap as low as possible going forward. I think that's all I need to say on the pay gap.
Thank you, Richard. Before we start the questioning, I think Vaughan has something to say.
Oh yeah, it's only to make, I don't wish to embarrass Richard, but I might. It's only to mention to members that obviously we've heard a lot about the work Richard's been doing with DICE, and obviously the issues he's encountered, and has been something of a one-man band with people in the organisation. But there's a Stepping Up Awards and graduation ceremony on Saturday the 18th of June, which is being held within Bristol. And we've received notification as a service. I'll just read it out exactly as it says in front of me. It says, it's for Richard. It says, we're delighted to announce that you've been awarded the Stepping Up Rising Star Award 2022, which is obviously a very prestigious award and covers the entire Bristol and Avon area as part of the Stepping Up programme. You've consistently practiced authentic leadership. Your commitment to support diversity and inclusion within Avon Fire and Rescue Service is an example for others to follow. So I think it's really pleasing to see that Richard's work within Avon is being recognised much, much wider, and obviously with the Stepping Up programme, which is all around attracting diverse communities into the place of work, and that's something Richard's been working on widely. So it's just, I'd like to offer our congratulations from this group to Richard.
That's not embarrassing.
Thank you, Vaughan, and thank you, Richard. Adam, I believe you wanted to come in with a question.
So it's a request, actually. So thank you, Richard, and congratulations on that recognition. That's something you should personally be very proud of. Avon Fire and Rescue is one of the few organisations I know that also reports on ethnicity pay gap, which I think
Yes.
is amazing. But I think it loses some of its value as a report because it doesn't come the same time as the gender pay gap. And I appreciate that's already scheduled to be reported. But could you look at the reporting schedule for the following civic year so they are reported together? Because I think that adds more value if they're taken at the same time.
Sure.
Just from a legal point of view, we are told when we need to report the gender,
Yes.
so it would be a case of the other one moving.
Yes.
So the regulations specify that it's based on a snapshot date, and that's told to us in the regulation. So I believe the snapshot date is the 31st of March each year, and then you have so many months after that within which to publish the information. But yeah, we can certainly look at the other information.
Scheduled for this civic year, but if it could be realised.
And also the timeline slipped, so we were all allowed, public sector organisations were all allowed an extension of time last year because of COVID, so we're just trying to get back on track now. So,
And the other thing around the ethnicity pay gap report is that it's not, there isn't a legal requirement to do that anyway, but also we won't be able to deliver it in the same report format as this because the sensitive nature of the figures in there
So
as well.
to be clear, I'm not looking for it to mirror that.
Sure.
I think from an equality perspective, they should be taken at the same time. That's all.
okay.
And I think because I genuinely think it's a really positive thing, but I think it loses its impact because it's not reported at the same time as the gender.
We'd take that away, definitely.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Thank you. I would like to move that we note this report then, please.
Also, no, there's another recommendation. So it's to note the content of the report, but also to approve the publication of the formal Gender Pay Gap Report 2022, which you will see the draft is dated, it's at Appendix 1. So the draft is dated for publication for tomorrow, assuming you're going to approve it today, but you need to vote on approving it today.
Okay. So I'd like to go back to how we vote on things. So I would like to ask any members for any votes against.
Or can we have a proposer and a seconder?
You propose and a second, that would be good. Propose and Shelley to second, thank you. Okay, so let's move for votes against, please. No, any abstentions? And a show of hands for 4, please.
Thank you, members.
Thank you. And thank you, Richard. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda really is this time the date of the next meeting, which is the 16th of September 2022 at 10:30 somewhere in this building.
Yes.
And the next item is the exclusion of the press public for the next item. And so that the public be excluded from this meeting during the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to the Schedule 12A Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and that in accordance with the Schedule 12A Part 2 Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
So, Chair, do you want to propose and get a seconder?
So I'd like to propose, and
Brenda
will be seconding.
All in favour? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So we'll move into the team session.
Stop the recording, thank you.